La vida tiene la curiosa fijación de marcarse por dos puntos, el nacimiento y la muerte. Entre ellas, centenares de historias que merecen ser contadas. Soy Alfonso Castro Cid, este es el podcast de CREAP Colombia. 2Puntos, historias que merecen ser contadas. Hola, bienvenidos a otro episodio de 2Puntos, el podcast de las historias que merecen ser contadas. Hoy, un episodio especial. Vamos a hablar con un autor, speaker, intelectual, historiador, Johan Norberg. Él es sueco. Tuve la oportunidad de conocerlo hace 2 años, perdón, en Estocolmo. Y le dije que lo iba a invitar a Colombia y está hoy aquí, que celebrábamos nuestro tercer foro Progreso de CREA con un increíble resultado. Acabamos de terminar y no podíamos dejar pasar esta oportunidad de tener a Johan aquí. Johan, thank you a lot for being in Colombia, for coming to Colombia, invited by CREA for this, our third forum on sustainability and progress.
Thank you.
Your topic.
Yeah, perfect. Fits perfectly. Thanks for inviting me to Colombia.
No, it's my pleasure. I was telling the audience that we met our first time in Stockholm a little bit more than 3 years now, and we had a small chat. I would like to come back to the first question that I did at that point. That was, how did you came on to studying and making your life about how the world is better today than before?
Yeah, that is a great question. And the reason is that I didn't used to think that the world was a great place. I used to have a very pessimistic view of world development, the environment, and other things. So starting to realize that actually there are problems in the world, but this is the best time to be alive when you look at any indicator of health, wealth, life expectancy, child mortality, education, freedom, democracy, peace. For all its faults, for all its troubles, that was such a pleasant surprise to me. And ever since I started to realize that, I've been, first of all, felt a lot of gratitude to being born in this era and our ancestors who fought so hard to leave a better world for us. But also, I've always felt this sort of slight self-correction that I was so incredibly wrong about the world once upon a time. So it's really my duty to try to talk to people and educate them about this.
This started from what time? What age?
That's probably at university, early years at university. I was about early 20s, something like that.
That every single person at its 20s wants to change the world. Was that your case at that moment?
That's right. It was probably a very influential moment in my life because, you know, the discoveries you make when you're in your early 20s, they have a way of setting you on a particular path. And what I found out, especially studying history and the history of my ancestors, and see that, look, life was awful in Sweden in the mid-19th century. There were no good old days. People didn't live ecologically. They died ecologically at a young age. That gave me this mission that I have to talk about that. What makes progress possible and other risks that we might lose.
So, what is your milestone that you say during this time of my work? This was the point where I found a true number. You're full with figures, numbers, data. What was that you find that definitely this was the key?
Yeah, well, I had to start looking at data, economic history, health history, because I realized that we can't trust our instincts or our sort of gut feeling for it, because mine was all wrong. So I had to start to look at the data, and then just realizing things like in almost every generation that has come before us, life expectancy has been around 30 years, which means that I would have been dead a long time ago by now if we didn't have the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and all the wealth that has been created since. And that was kind of a dramatic point for me to discover that. And the fact that child mortality was roughly 50% throughout almost all generations. Every second child died before they became adults. And now we're down to 1% or even lower than that in the richest countries.
Why do people tend to get this sense that everything is going to waste, that the world is going in the wrong direction? And we read your books, we see you on speaking and all the figures that you give. We are definitely in the right track. Why is this happening to people all around the world? This sense of everything is going waste.
I think partly it's some sort of evolutionary maladaptation. Historically, we need to learn about everything that's bad and awful and terrible because that could be a threat to our lives. So we have to be oversensitive to everything that goes wrong in the world. And obviously, that is then accelerated through media and social media, where everything that's shocking and bleeds will lead and top the news cycle everywhere. And I think that's one reason why we constantly think that the world is about to end. And I do too when I follow media. And that's why we need context and talk about the longer term perspective.
But Johan Norberg talks to Johan Norberg when he feels, this is going the wrong way. He goes back to and reviews what he's read or what he's done.
I do. I wake up every morning looking at the push notifications on my cell phone, and it's all death and disaster, obviously. And then the first thing I do is to remind myself that, yes, but this is a snapshot of the world. Trying to understand everything that goes on by looking at the most dramatic things. That's like trying to understand a city by being in the emergency rooms of a hospital. Yes, what goes on there is a real thing. It's something that we have to deal with, but it's not the whole story about that city. So what I do is I try to remind myself there is a context, there is a broader perspective, there's a longer term perspective, which is often much more hopeful. And yes, sometimes I study what I've written about.
You came to Colombia only for 36 hours or maybe less. What is your sense? What can you grab from ours and the people that you have met, the stories that have been told to you from different conversations? It's a small time. What is your sense?
It's far too short a time, but on the other hand, I speak to the most interesting people who give me a perspective on what is going on. And one of the things that happens to me is that I become much more hopeful about Colombia. For all its problems and political partisanship that might be not always in the best place, it seems like society functions incredibly well. I think institutions have held up, even in times of angry politics. And I think, again, if you look at the longer term perspective, I mean, the past 25 years, Colombia's GDP per capita has roughly doubled. That's an amazing achievement. Life expectancy has increased by 7 years. 7 years. You could celebrate every birthday in the past 25 years by just approaching death by 7 to 8 months rather than 12 months. Congratulations, you got a bonus there.
Si tienes una historia que merece ser contada y quieres innovar en temas de comunicación, marketing y asuntos públicos, visita el enlace que está en nuestra descripción. Y no olvides seguirnos en todas nuestras redes sociales, 2Puntos, el podcast de las historias que merecen ser contadas.
You gave those numbers in the speech today, and you compare Colombia to a point not far, far away in Sweden. Can you share with us those numbers?
Yeah, and why do I do that? I do that because we're always so static in our perspective of the world. We look at differences, and some are rich, some are poor. We rarely think about, okay, what's the movement? What does the transition look like? And how fast is it moving? And then it's interesting to compare Colombia to Sweden, which is one of the richest countries on the planet, happens to be my own country as well. Then you can see that, yes, GDP per capita is sort of 3 times higher in Sweden. On the other hand, Colombia's GDP per capita is roughly where Sweden was in the mid-1960s, when Sweden was seen as the envy of the world, one of the richest societies that the world has ever created. People were going, wow, how can they be so magnificently rich in Sweden? And Colombia is there now. And that puts some perspective on the dynamic transition that is going on. And even better when you look at indicators of health and living standards, like life expectancy in Colombia is now where it was in Sweden in the mid-70s. Child mortality is now where it was in the late 80s.
So your takeaway of that figure, because we're talking about in proportion, we're roughly 60 years away from where you were in that time with those numbers. What should happen or what could happen? Doing a little bit of futurology.
Yeah. Well, it depends on what happens next. It depends on the institutions. It depends on whether Colombia is open for the eccentric scientists, innovators, and businesses who will come up with better solutions, or if it won't. If it is open to them, I'm sure that Colombia could catch up quite rapidly, because it is now moving much faster than countries like Sweden is today.
Okay.
Colombia should do that, because there's a lot of catch up to do, lots of technologies that can be used straight away to leapfrog technologies that we have. But in all those terms, child mortality, life expectancy, GDP per capita, Colombia is improving much faster than we do in Sweden. So you're breathing down our necks.
Hopefully. You definitely, I have heard a lot of conversations today, yesterday, and you try to keep yours aside from politics. But definitely we need to talk about politics in order to understand where the countries are standing. Do you have a political side that you prefer or a trend that you prefer?
Yes, no, I have strong political opinions. But I also want to speak to everyone. So I don't want to be too partisan and say these guys are good and those are bad, because I think that trying to get the good out of every group is better than just playing the partisan game. But I have a very strong sort of classical liberal perspective on open societies and free markets with a limited government governed by the rule of law, which restrains the executive. That's what opens up for the creativity of more people, more innovations, more surprises, and that's what creates focus. So that's incredibly important. As I said during my speech, I think that politicians shouldn't be exciting and fun. They should be stable and boring, so that we can be exciting and fun in business, at universities, in private.
Are people willing to go for a boring president or a boring government?
Swedes are. I'm not sure you, but I guess you can be fun and charismatic, and yet don't play too much games with the fundamental institutions of a society. That's the important thing, because innovation, progress is unpredictable. It has to come from surprising places, and in that case, what we need, paradoxically, is very predictable, stable institutions that protects those creators, those innovators, those entrepreneurs, their properties, their achievements, so that you know what kind of rules are there tomorrow, because otherwise we won't invest in the future.
Yeah. I would jump back to the relation that you did with Colombia and Sweden. And at some point in another conversation 2 years ago, you told me that Sweden was growing in a good pace, and suddenly you start to believe that you were like the kings of the world. And what happened?
Yeah, that's the most dangerous thing that happened to this kind of hubristic sense that nothing can go wrong. We've been so successful so far, so we take it for granted. And instead of thinking about what makes this possible, how do you create wealth? How do you create wealth? We started to think in the 1970s about how can we just sort of redistribute money and make everything free for everyone, solve every problem quickly, top down. Sounded great. Sounded like something you could be doing when you're top of the world, when you have that wealth. But obviously, wealth is not a big pile of cash that just happens to be lying around. It's something you have to create every day. You have to have people going to work every morning thinking about how can they do something a little bit better today than yesterday. And we stopped doing that in Sweden in the 1970s and 80s. Many big companies left Sweden because it was difficult to do any business with very high taxes, very big government, everything regulated. But worse than that, the next generation wasn't interested in going into business, taking risks, investing in the future. So this started a long decline that lasted for some 25 years. Not a single net job was created in the private sector during this era. So
Nobody would believe that in Colombia.
yeah, so that's really our cautionary tale.
Huh.
And now there's a consensus in Sweden that this was a mistake. We shouldn't have done that. And we reformed the economy quite drastically in the 1990s, got back to a more market-based model, which has once again outperformed other countries.
How did that happen? How did you reform the economy?
Unfortunately, it had to crash first. That's the negative message. It wasn't enough to say that this is probably not sustainable. Let's do something else. It ended in a financial crash in the early 1990s when all these debts that had been built up to fund all those social programs was just too big, too unsustainable. And the rest of the world just said, we can't lend you more money. So we didn't have the money to just keep going. And that focuses minds. If you're about to be hanged in a fortnight, that focuses minds. What do I have to do? What's important? What's not? And then all sides of politics actually were mature enough to sit down and think about how do we do this.
So it was a general consensus between different political sides.
Yeah, and obviously they fought over many of the details. But the overall sense that we have to go back to more of a limited government, more of a free market with competitive businesses that aren't as heavily regulated. We can't tax capital and corporations this much. That was a general consensus.
So you're traveling a lot around the world, getting this message of optimism, but not naive. I heard you say that, not to be naive. Where is the balance? What is the checkpoints that societies have to do in this turmoil that we are all around the world? As you said, and we read the news, this is happening all around the world. Streamers from left to right trying to have great ideas and trying to put them into action right away.
Yeah.
What are your recommendations for society and companies and CEOs around the world?
Well, my recommendation is to be an optimist. And an optimist is not someone who is complacent and think that everything will sort itself out automatically. Because in that case, I wouldn't have to write and talk. Things will look after themselves. It is to have the sense that there will be problems will arise, but we have it within our own capacity and our will to fix those problems and innovate our way around them. And that's a key message, because we need that culture of hope and possibility in order to wake up in the morning and go to work, right? Because otherwise it's hopeless, we give up, and then we lose out, which is incredibly dangerous. So my message to everyone who goes to work in the morning and to everyone in business is to, when things feel hopeless, think about the fact that it's always that hopeless. So our ancestors faced much steeper odds than we do, at a level with much worse forces attacking them, at a level of knowledge and technological capacity and wealth that was much lower than ours. And they managed to get through and create this much better place for us. So at our level, we really should be able to do it if we have that sense of hope.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you start getting older, you start to see the world different, a different perspective. And we share almost the same age, and you start to think that the before was better. That the new generations are coming, like, now see they don't want to work. Is that your feeling?
Instinctively, yes. Sometimes that happens. On the other hand, when I spend time and when I talk to the next generation, they're incredibly impressive.
Yeah.
And then I remind myself something interesting, and that's every generation thought the same about the next generation. And that's probably because, you and I invested so much time in certain things, certain technologies, certain way of following the news, for example. And then the next generation, they don't care about.
No.
So to us, they seem hopeless. But
they don't read the newspaper anymore.
yeah, I found that really hopeful.
People don't know what we were talking about that before the interview. That we feel that if you grab the newspaper, the news is real.
Yeah, that's right. On the other hand, they're doing other things. They invest their time in new technologies, in new business models that really excites them when I look at it. So they come to it from surprising places to us and read. This is how we make progress. Every generation, every next generation has to do things that we find a little bit weird and eccentric because they invest in more knowledge and capacity in other areas than we do. So they'll come up with new great ways of hopefully improving the world.
Your last book touches a lot of this conversation of the peaks on societies. Can you tell us a little bit more about this new? I think that it's a few months that has seen the light in the US, as I understand.
That's right, human. And in January, it published in Spanish as well. And it's a book about what we can learn from the rise and fall of golden age. So from ancient Athens and Rome and China under the Song dynasty, the Renaissance, Dutch Republic. What can we learn from why creative explosions suddenly happen in certain areas? And why do they sometimes peter out and lose their way? And I think those are incredibly important lessons for us if we want to extend the lifespan of this civilization.
I know that writing is exhausting. It can be exhausting. How is the process of writing? When I got to know you, I have read one book, Progress. Then you came out with 2 years after Open, and then the Capital Manifesto, and now Peak. This rhythm of writing and writing and writing, how does Johan works with that?
Well, the first book is the hardest, and then it gets easier. To me, what I do is that I write all the time, without me even know away. So basically, when I have an idea for a book, I write down an outline, the basic themes I want to explore, and then I leave it be for quite a long time, and I do other things, and I talk to other people. And once I do that, travel around the world and talk to you, I constantly sort of start getting new ideas about how this connects to the themes that I've been thinking about. So really, I'm a bit of a parasite because I get absorbing energy and good ideas from other people. And then what I find out is that when and obviously there's a lot of reading involved, and that kind of basic research. But then when I sit down to really write the book, I realize that I've already written most of it because the pieces are already fit into the right place.
When we talked 2 years ago, you told me that AI was a great opportunity, that it proposed some risks, but it had great. How is AI working for you in your day-to-day work?
Yeah. My first instinct is that it's actually something that's doing terrible damage to my competitive advantage. Because it used to be that I thought that my main expertise was to devour huge amounts of information and then rapidly make sense of it. Now with AI, anyone can do that in faster time. So it seems like a threat to me, to my business model. On the other hand, I'd better start using that for those purposes and other ones if I want to keep up with it. And then I realized something that, the last time around we saw a dramatic IT and ICT revolution was with the World Wide Web and Googling information. Because at that time, I thought that, oh no, this threatens my way of exploring the world, because I used to think that my competitive advantage was to go to the library, looking through all the catalogs, rapidly understanding what's important, what's not, finding the right data series and finding the right old magazine articles and getting them. And now suddenly anyone could do that with Google. That's cheating.
Yeah.
But obviously that also liberated 50% of my time, which I could then devote to hopefully analyzing that material and presenting it in a better way. And I thought that may be a better way to. And I think that AI can do the same thing. So I play around with it all the time to learn how to use it.
Yeah, I think that is a threat for everybody to really understand what's the use that can be done for our daily job.
Well, obviously, one excellent way of using is to just brainstorm ideas. Give me 10 crazy ideas about this. That I'm writing, or something, or about Colombia. And then I get sort of AI will give me crazy ideas, but some of them will set cogs in motion that wouldn't have done otherwise. So in a way, it's like talking to people, but with access to even more information.
And being in a huge library all the time.
Yeah,
That would
it's a
be
nice place.
Yeah, it's that for you must be like heaven.
Yeah, it's like the Jose Luis Borges story, basically. I always thought paradise as a kind of label.
Johan, when we were talking before last night and dinner, you told me, well, I have 2 kids. I have a family. And when people think that you're writing your books and you're traveling around, you made it. You don't have to do anything more. You're done. And that's something common that I always have to our invites here in the podcast. Do you still work really, really hard?
If I'm brutally honest, sometimes I don't, and sometimes I just do things on routine. Because once you're sufficiently senior, you have this access to things that you've done before,
Of course.
and you can just repeat that. However, when I do that, it's boring. I don't enjoy it as much. I sometimes to write a magazine article about something that I know really, really well. And I think I can do that quickly because it's so easy. I've done this 1,000 times before. And I find that it's so difficult because it's boring. I've done this before. So, I need a bit of a challenge. I need something that's a little bit difficult because otherwise I don't exert effort. I don't work hard. And in that case, I lose interest in it. So I've learned. I always thought that it would be nice to just relax and not work too hard. I've realized that I don't like that. I don't think we're made to create.
To relax and just enjoy the ride.
We can relax as a break from creative activity.
Yeah.
Definitely we need that. But we get bored if we relax all the time. And then we make our vacations more difficult, right? We begin to explore things and we read something difficult or what have you. So I think we need that in life. We have to realize that we need some difficulties.
No, and I think that the answer to the question is you being in Colombia only for 20 something hours and going back. You're traveling back to Europe, and that's a part of the story that's very interesting. If you're working very close to different, I wouldn't say governments, but society and news, where are you heading to?
Now I'm heading this evening, actually, going to Estonia and to Tallinn, the capital. The small Baltic state that has made incredible economic journey recently. And the secret agenda is that we see so many things in common in Nordic countries, the Baltic states, in Poland, the Dutch, Northern Europe, Britain and Ireland, in both keeping an open global economy going, but also kind of trying to make the European Union a functioning internal market without too much of standardization and regulations from Brussels. And the Estonians are great allies as well.
Great. In that sense, the message that you send everywhere, what would you say is like the hardest message to pass through to people to believe you? As you say, I always say this, and people they don't see it, they don't believe it.
The hardest thing to convince people of is that the world is not about to end. That keeps coming back, whatever it is. I have ruined dinner parties by saying, look, we're actually improving the environment now. We have the technology. We're gonna fix global warming. They go, oh, that ruins because we're so invested in our problems. So some people don't want to see the solutions.
But have you never lose? And this is another typical question of these calls. Have you never lost that faith that everything's gonna be better? At some point, one day, you woke up and you said, definitely, this is going the wrong way. I don't want to wake up.
That happens, for sure.
How do you get out of that?
That isn't the horse in George Orwell's Animal Farm. It just says, I'm going to have to work a little bit harder. So it's often that, but it's also, I often see many trends going in the wrong directions. And right now, world trade is hanging in the balance. We're moving towards a more protectionist era. It makes me incredibly disappointed because, we've been trying to say this for 250 years now. Trade is a positive sum game, and we all benefit from having access to other people's brains. So it makes me disappointed. But I somehow have automatized the way from the problem to starting to think of plan Bs. So, okay, how do we fix new trade agreements in the EU and Mercosur and India and Indonesia and move on? How do we save this world trade order despite these problems? And I think one way of dealing with your anxiety about the world, both personally and politically, is just to sort of get up and do something about it rather than wallow in your anxiety. And I might exaggerate my own influence when it comes to saving the world order, but at least it gives you the sense that at least I'm trying to do something.
Yeah, I always heard from a former, not boss, but client. He always said, if you complain every single day at your office that the coffee is not good, stop complaining and bring some good coffee to the table. So
That would be easy in Colombia as well.
yeah, that's easy to Colombia. Yeah. Johan, it was a great pleasure to have you here in Bogota. Definitely, I want to invite you again as soon as possible. Hopefully, we can do that.
I'd love to come back. Thank you so much.
Johan, a last question. This is a small challenge that we have with my younger daughter. It's a funny question. The ice cream, you prefer it from vanilla or chocolate?
I'm going to.
Great. It's always chocolate. That's what we say.
Yeah. Just your thought.
Chocolate. Always. Yeah. Johan, thank you very much for having this time. I know that we're running into the schedule. You have to leave, but thank you for having this interview and thank you for being with Creab here in Colombia.
My pleasure. Thank you.
A ustedes, muchísimas gracias por seguirnos. Espero que les haya gustado esta entrevista con Johan Norberg. Los invito a que conozcan sus libros. Tiene, how many books you have written
In total,
in total?
that's too many to count. It's a bit more than 20.
It's a bit more than 20. Más de 20 libros. Recomendados todos. A ustedes, muchísimas gracias por seguirnos. Pueden seguir en todas nuestras redes sociales y suscribirse aquí abajo en el link de este podcast. Invitarlos el próximo martes a un nuevo capítulo de 2Puntos.